opportunity to hear from a great many Canadians as a result of our cross-Canada tour. We have before us 5 groups of witnesses who will have 10 minutes each. Each group then will have 10 minutes to make their presentation. From the Legislative Assembly of New Brunswick, we have Mr. Bruce Fitch, interim leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of New Brunswick. Welcome, sir. Mr. Fitch. We also have, as a representative of Unifor, Mr. Jerome Diaz, National President of Unifor.
You can call me Jerry.
Jerry, okay, got it. Okay. Well, I'll call you Mr. Diaz, being as it we're in committee and so on. Then, as an individual, we have Professor Arthur Lupia, Professor of Political Science at the University of Michigan. He is joining us tonight by video conference from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Thank you for being before the committee and sharing your views and knowledge on the issue with us. We appreciate it very much. From CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, we have Wanda Morris, the Chief Operating Officer, Vice President of Advocacy, and we have Wade Poziomka, Director of Policy and General Counsel of Advocacy. And then from the Canadian Armed Forces, we have Gordon Dave Corbould, Commanding Officer of the Joint Personnel Support Unit. And we have Vihar Joshi, Deputy Judge Advocate General, Administrative Law. So we have a great lineup this evening. It should be very interesting. There should be a great deal to learn from all of you, and of course we'll be interacting through questions and answers. The way it works is after everyone has done their presentation, we'll have one round of questions, and each member will have 7 minutes to engage with the witnesses. At the 7-minute mark, unfortunately, we'll have to move on to the next questioner, but that doesn't prevent you from addressing an issue later on when you have the floor, an issue that's been asked about but that you didn't get a chance to respond to because of the time limit. So without any further ado, we'll start with Mr. Bruce Fitch for 10 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lejaz. Je m'appelle Bruce Fitch.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Bruce Fitch, and I'm the interim leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of New Brunswick, and I'm very happy to be here this afternoon and take part in this panel.
I appreciate this opportunity to make some remarks before the Special Committee on Electoral Reform. And just like a good book, sometimes you like to turn to the last page and see what the outcome is going to be, so I'll take the suspense away, and so there's no surprises. And but I am going to declare up front I will be speaking in favor of the status quo. But if, in fact, the committee and the Parliament decides to make significant changes to the way Canadians elect their members, I believe that a referendum is required, because it's the people that own democracy. The politicians don't own democracy. And my position on these matters come from a long history of working with and for the people in New Brunswick, especially my little riding, mon circumscription, the Riverview. I've been elected 4 times as a member of the Legislative Assembly, and previous to that I was mayor for 2 terms and a councillor for 3 terms before that. So in New Brunswick, our voting system is very similar to the national model. Firstly, a first past the post. There has been variations in my lifetime, including a multi-member ridings, but other than the occasional boundary change or a shift in the number of MLAs, the current system has been stable for the past 40 years, and for most part, the people seem to be happy with that system that we have. Now, this is an important point to make because in New Brunswick over the past 40 years, there has been some very, very interesting results where the democratic expression in terms of the percentage of votes for parties have been wildly and disproportionately translated into very, very different seat allocations. Just to name a few examples, in 1987, the McKenna Liberals took 60% of the vote, but 100% of the seats in the legislature. In 2006, the Graham Liberals received fewer votes overall than Premier Bernard Lord, but they still formed a majority government. And recently, in 2014, the Green Party elected their first member to the New Brunswick legislature with 25,000 votes provincially, while the NDP elected no member with 50,000 votes province-wide. So despite all these variants, basically there's been no one complaining about the voting system in New Brunswick. There's been no mass protests in front of the legislature. No one has challenged the legitimacy of the government. And on a personal level, I know going door to door over the last number of elections and over the last 27 years of being an elected official, that outside of the occasional discussion on the doorstep, no one has raised this as a concern. The concerns are economy and jobs, health care, education, and senior care. Now, you asked the presenters to the committee to consider 7 questions before appearing, and I would like to boil that down to why do you think you need change or not? Now, while I see areas that could be improved, the fact of the matter, the people that I represent are satisfied with the current system, despite the warts and all. They like it because it's simple to understand. It is because it's accessible, and they even have an option not to vote, which, of course, as a politician, we always encourage people to vote, but certainly it comes down to choices. Are all competent and decent, and for that reason, forcing people to vote under a mandatory voting system, I would not be in favor of. It's a freedom of choice that people exercise. They feel because they know their local MP or MLA in our area, and they're represented by that person. They notice that over time, the results of the election have become more inclusive, more representative of women, minority communities, and diversity, and people like that. Overall, they see the results of the current system as fair because all parties, all candidates have an equal chance to succeed. Very similar to life in general, the results are not always perfect and sometimes a little different than expected, but there is a foundation built on equality of opportunity. So at the end of the day, I work for these same people who are relatively satisfied with the current system, and it would seem more than just a little disingenuous to try and imagine a number of different reasons why we should change the way that myself and my colleagues get hired every 4 years, and to change that system without the approval of the people that are doing the hiring, basically the bosses of the elected officials. So specific to this committee and for your deliberations, I would say please keep the first past the post system. The people in New Brunswick like it, and if the government chooses to move ahead with significant changes because of it's popular, it's ill-conceived election promise, it's just something to do to distract from other issues, then whatever the new system that is proposed, it must be ratified by the people in a referendum, and a clear and concise referendum. We commissioned a poll in New Brunswick a short while ago when I was leader of the opposition because the provincial government in New Brunswick was also considering some of the changes in the voting system. And it was interesting to see that 77% of respondents said that the New Brunswickers should be consulted first and a referendum should be held before any changes are made in the system. And again, that's a question through a pollster, but we had 77%, which is a very, very clear majority. And that majority, I don't think, should be ignored. These results align clearly with other national polls which have been conducted over the last 6 months. But, and again, I'm not the only New Brunswickers here. One of your members, my friend Matt, is here today, and he's from Fredericton. Finally, you also may want to know what we think about online voting. I think in general, every election cycle, there are always some administrative improvements in terms of improving accessibility to the voting stations, but accessibility and ease of voting can't trump the faith in the system itself. During the last provincial election, there was a new administrative system of electronic vote tabulation machines that was rolled out across the province of New Brunswick. And this was, of course, intended to allow the results to be known instantaneously, right away. And right at the close of the polls, we were told within 15 minutes you'll have your results. Well, as luck would have it, or as glitches happen, on election night there was a glitch, and the results actually weren't known until the next day. Now, subsequent recounts prove that the machines were accurate. The perception left with the voters that this new technology cannot be trusted to deliver immediate results. So before people rush into online voting, especially in a big scale, there should be a cautionary note and beware to make sure that it works and works better than some of the ways it's been done in the past. So overall, Mr. Chairman, I do think it's always a good thing to look at our voting system every so often and continue to modernize it to take advantage of technology or to improve service levels and accessibility. But when major changes are proposed, such as the fundamental way in which ballots are structured and counted, that requires the approval of the people. I think you find, as several referendum and plebiscites have proven in the past, that despite the flaws of the first past the post system, the people see them as legitimate, simple to understand, and accountable. And they will want us to stick up for what has served their country very well over the past 150 years. And as I mentioned, it's the people that own democracy, not the politicians, and that's why they should be asked if the way they hire their politicians should be changed. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitch. We'll go now to Mr. Diaz, please.
Thank you very much. If you listen to our members, we listen to Canadians, the reason we've had such poor voters' turnouts over the last several elections, which is starting to finally turn around, is because people believe their vote doesn't count. Doesn't mean anything. And what I love is when you take a look at the last two federal elections, majority governments with 39.5%, 39.6%. Over 60% of the Canadians didn't vote for either of the governing party. So I'm fascinated when I listen to remarks about democracy and referendums, because we know in the last 10 years there was not a referendum. C4, C51, 377, 525, not one referendum. So I will argue that those that are screaming for a referendum today, we need to take a look at their history. Now, I will argue that on October the 19th there was a referendum. And it was a referendum of change. And one of the issues was clearly the elimination of the first past the post electoral system. So on behalf of Unifor's 310,000 members, I am here to emphasize the importance of implementing electoral reform in time for the next election. I want to get straight to the point of the discussion, because it seems to us at Unifor that this process is quickly coming to a moment of truth. According to remarks from the Prime Minister and also from Minister Monsef, broad-based support for change is a prerequisite for changing the system. The Chief Electoral Officer has said we need the broadest possible consensus. So let me be very direct with all of you. There is a broad base of support for electoral reform. You have the most recent ECO survey from only a week ago. 60% want the government to fulfill its election pledge that we have had the last first past the post election. It's true. Support for specific options is less decisive, but still, there is a clear broad-based support. Support for PR, 46%. Support for the current system, 29%. Support for preferential ballots, 26%. In other words, there is one clear alternative to the present system, proportional representation. Our members and most Canadians believe that they have voted for change. They have voted for the principle of change, expecting that you will implement that decision with specific reforms that are understandable and explainable to our members and our communities. This committee has the capacity, the mandate, and the information on voting systems that is needed to bring forward a majority position on electoral reform, and when you do so, the vast majority of Canadians will support you. In August, our National Convention affirmed that electoral reform must be addressed. Our members unanimously endorsed the proportional representation system for Canada. We did not get into the weeds of the particular kind of PR system. We say that is your job. We support the principle of proportionality to make sure that every vote counts and to make false majorities impossible. We want fewer reasons to vote strategically and more opportunity to vote for a hopeful, progressive future. There's no question our organization and one of my previous organizations, the CAW, talked a lot about strategic voting. But what was strategic voting really all about? We voted strategically because we didn't want a party. So it wasn't about voting for the party you wanted, it was making sure that one party didn't get elected or have a majority with less than 40%. So we want fewer reasons to vote strategically. We want more reasons for young people and all those who have been alienated from politics to engage and participate in the democratic process. In our view, when Canadians think about electoral reform, they want the system to change so that all votes directly impact the composition of Parliament. Instead of the situation in 2015 where an estimated 9 million votes are without real reflection in Parliament. I want to comment also on the idea that has been floated that smaller reforms could be implemented with a smaller consensus. I don't think this makes a lot of sense. First, support for the present system is pretty much limited to the core base of the previous government. Support for preferential ballots, which we assume is what is meant by smaller reforms, is even less. So there is not more support for a smaller reform. Frankly, there is not a single person in uniform who has spoken out in favor of ranked ballots as the preferred option for reform. So I urge you not to go down that road. The way to get this done is for the majority of you to agree on the principles that represent Canadian opinions and values, and then propose an electoral system that best implements those principles. In our opinion, the core issue is that Canadians want a different system that eliminates false majorities. We have too much experience that these false majorities produce extremist, ideological governments that do more harm than good. And I can argue the last 10 years anytime. Canadians want less partisanship in politics and more cooperation that produces good public policy. It means that we all have to look forward to a different kind of government with the knowledge that it is far less likely that any one party will dominate in a way that we have become accustomed. But we still have stable government. In our opinion, we'll have more stable government, and the incoming government will not spend the first year repealing the extremist agenda of the previous government. We will still have parties with distinct alternative policies. We will need more political leadership, not less, and it is that political leadership we need and expect now. If the majority for electoral reform fails to take this opportunity, it will be a long time before these conditions come around again. Uniform members are ready for change now, and we are expecting you to lead that change to ensure that a new proportional voting system is in place for the next federal election. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diaz. We'll go now to Professor Lupia in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Hello. Thank you for having me. I regret that I can't be with you in person today. I'm in Washington at the moment. I've been asked to speak with you about what voters know about referenda and some of the implications for strategies and outcomes. Democracies around the world use referenda to offer legitimacy and elevated legal status to a range of statutory and constitutional proposals, similar to what the gentleman from New Brunswick was saying. He was looking for legitimacy. So that's the starting principle. For people like ourselves who know a lot about referenda, for people like you who have been involved in drafting a referenda and thinking about all the possible things that could be in it or that might not be in it, about what language to use to describe it, from that perspective, many referenda are very complicated instruments. And yet when the same question is brought to voters, they necessarily see it differently, because we don't ask them to rewrite the proposal. By the time we bring it to them, the question is simply yes or no. And so, not surprisingly, they're going to think about referenda differently than we do. So what I'd like to do is review a couple basic facts about what people know about referenda. There's a question about whether citizens are competent to make this type of decision. And so I'll give you an argument for and against. The argument against it is that, referenda typically deal with complex topics to which many voters pay little or no attention. Moreover, when you run surveys about referenda and you ask people even what seem to be basic questions about the content, it's often the case that voters answer the questions incorrectly. So from that perspective, it looks like they're not qualified to vote in a referendum. But there's also evidence in favor of them voting competently. So let me first say what I might mean by competence. What I'm talking about is a voter who casts a vote that's consistent with a set of facts and values that they care about. The values may pertain to the life they want for their family or their community or their nation, and it might be different for people. Different people in different situations might vote differently. But by competence, I mean the vote that someone would cast if they knew a lot about the referendum in question. But typically they don't. So the question is, can they still vote competently? And in many cases, the answer is that they can. And the reason they can do this is, again, they only have two choices, yes or no. If there was a correct vote for, let's say, a particular voter, and they use the coin to cast a vote, they'd get the correct answer 50% of the time. But actually, there are a number of situations where voters can do better than that. And the way they do that is they look for simple environmental cues, which in referenda often come in the form of interest group or party endorsements. So you have a well-known entity or person who has a political history, you know their stands, and they come out and say, we're in favor of this change or we're against it. And people use those, they calibrate to try and figure out, what would I do if I knew as much as this person? So if there are well-informed people who share the values of voters, they can use various endorsements to figure out how they would vote if they knew more. Now, this is controversial because you might think, well, still voters should know a lot. But in the report I've sent, there are actually many cases where all of us make what seems like a very complicated decision using a very simple environmental cue. The example that is in my report is driving. If you think about a busy intersection in a city at rush hour, maybe 4 lanes of traffic each way on each road, there can be 150 or 200 cars at the intersection at a time. And the engineering problem is, how do you get everyone safely through a relatively small space in 90 seconds? To try and solve that problem from an engineering perspective is very complicated because you have to think about the speed and acceleration potential of each of the cars. You have to know something about the intention of every driver, and you have to know something about what every driver believes about every other driver. It's a very complicated problem, and yet all of us solve that problem every day with a nearly 100% success rate because we have a simple environmental cue that we can use to make the right decision. We look at the traffic light, we determine whether it's red or yellow or green, we look at the car in front of us, and that's the simple rule we use to make a decision about when to press the accelerator. In politics, things like political parties, interest group endorsements serve the role of traffic lights. And if you know that your interest is aligned with a particular group or individual, and they say, I've looked at the proposition, I've looked at the referendum, and for people with our values, this is a good thing or a bad thing, what we've shown, what happens over and over again, is people cast the same votes that they would have cast if they knew more. Now, of course, there's a downside to this, too, because if you're a voter and your values don't match the values of people speaking out and giving their point of view, you can get lost. You can also be subject to manipulation. That is, someone could represent themselves as sharing your values, but in fact they don't. This often happens in the form of mailers, right? So a person like the leader of an interest group wouldn't get up in public and maybe lie about their position, but maybe someone would send out a mailer saying the liberals in our country have a particular point of view, when in fact they don't. So to summarize, most people do not obtain detailed information about referenda. Instead, they look for interest group or simple cues to tell them how people who have values like theirs are likely to vote. An additional point that I'll just make is if you want to know whether people will take the time to read the fine print of a referendum, most people won't. That's because if you put the referendum online, you're competing with hockey games and Pokemon Go and cat video, which many people find very appealing. Very few people in any country will put those things aside to read a piece of legislation, right? There are some people, the internet allows some people to gain more information than has ever been possible about these things. But most citizens have their daily lives, and while some are watching, hockey games, others, it takes all of their energy through the day to feed their families or take care of elderly parents or to do things for their community. They don't have the time to invest in legislation, so most people in referenda look for these simpler cues to try and figure out what they would do. A related point is about how people think once they gain this information. So in the case of Brexit, there was a sense that there was this intellectual argument about trade liberalization that wasn't part of the campaign. And the question is, why is that? And one of the answers is, for voters, a referendum isn't an intellectual argument. The question for them is quite simply, is yes better for me, or is no voter better for me? Because those are the only two choices that they have. You could say, there are all these complicated aspects of Brexit that they should have thought about, but they weren't in the legislature. Their choice was very simple, and the only thing they could really do in that situation is figure out, is yes better for me, or is no? That was the thing they could act on. For other reasons, they might want to know more, but for the act of voting competently, that was sufficient. The last point I'll make is an implication for campaigns. In referendum campaigns, the no side has a huge advantage, right? And regardless of the legislation, this is true throughout the world. And you might ask why. Because with a no campaign, you're running against change, and people don't know what the life is going to be like under that change. So a typical no campaign is you think about a worst case scenario, and you make your whole campaign about that. Whereas in a yes campaign, you actually have to describe this new world and convince people that even though there are scary possibilities, their life is really going to be better. A statistic that I use just to tell you how skewed this is, in California, where there's a professional referendum industry and people care about their win-loss records, most people will not touch a yes campaign unless it's polling 70% or more a year in advance of Election Day. And the reason is because people recognize that no campaigns are easier to run. And so everybody believes that the yes support will fall over time. The mystery being, is it going to be over or above or below 50% on Election Day? But there are very few cases where support for yes actually goes up during a campaign. It happens, but it's quite rare. So in some voters, in many cases, if they have clear interest group endorsements, can make the same choices they would have made had they known more. But as a general matter, many times what they learn is that change is scary, and so if they're confused, you see more support for the status quo than you might expect.
Thank you so much for that extremely interesting perspective on referenda, including from the California perspective. I'm sure there will be many interesting questions. We'll go now to CARP with Wanda Morris, please. Will you be splitting your time with
We will. I'll start and Wade will continue. So CARP, we are the organization that advocates for health and financial security and freedom from age discrimination for older Canadians. We have 300,000 members across the country, and on average our members are above average education, income and net worth, and approximately 87% of them are retired. Our advocacy position here today is guided by our membership, and while there is strong interest in this issue, there is no consensus. So we're here today to share their divergent views, and I'm going to turn over to Wade.
Thank you. So prior to coming today, we surveyed our members, and we received 6,209 responses. What we learned from that survey is that 98.7% of our members voted in the last federal election. 81% of our members who responded believe that electoral reform is an important issue for them. And 90% of our members have some knowledge of electoral reform, with 36% feeling that they're extremely knowledgeable or very knowledgeable. Now, of CARP members who believe that electoral reform was an important issue, over 58% believe it's time to change the first-past-the-post system. I want to share with you some of the comments from our members, and I'll start with a few of the negative comments. Don't play around with a system that has worked for 149 years. Better the devil you know. The end result of systems in Italy and Israel are frightening, with fringe parties holding an exorbitant amount of power. With proportional representation, nothing can get done because the minority is allowed to stall all initiatives. And then, of course, we also had positive feedback from some of our members. Canada needs to reform the electoral process to be more democratic and representative of the people. The present system needs to change. A party can get less than 40% of the vote and still get a majority government and make very important changes when the majority of Canadians oppose those changes. It's a joke, not proud to be a Canadian. We've suffered too long with inadequate representation from a system that was devised 149 years ago. This is 2016. It's time to refresh the system and make every vote count. Of those, our members who opted for reform, the choice of alternative system is nearly evenly split, with a small majority preferring proportional representation over the ranked ballot system. The material that we reviewed from this committee prior to coming today indicates there's 4 characteristics that we look at: the ballot, number of candidates per constituency, procedure to determine winners, and the threshold for determining winners. From a process perspective, CARP also encourages this committee to consider whether or not there should be any barriers to access, thresholds for political parties, and if so, how significant should those be? For example, some members suggested there should be minimum thresholds for parties to obtain seats under a proportional system, whether that be 5 or 10%. Others noted that eliminating the first-past-the-post system would allow parties to build support over their current levels. The majority of our members, 65%, support a 3- or 4-party system as opposed to a system with more parties than that. In terms of a referendum, our members, again, were almost evenly split, with about 53% in favor of a referendum. Several members told us that education is required if a referendum will be held. And a couple comments that summed up that sentiment I'm going to share with you now from our members. The idea of reform is scary. It needs a lot of discussion and information. I feel too many citizens will not understand the complexities of this issue, and will feel comfortable with the status quo as a result. Several of our members suggested a trial period as opposed to a referendum, saying any change to our electoral system should be on a trial basis. 1 or 2 elections will give a good reading on the effect of change. This means that our Parliament can review the results 8 and 10 years down the road and modify or change back or establish a more acceptable form of selecting who can govern our country. Government must make every effort to ensure that the electorate understands exactly what is being voted on. If we go with a referendum, then I would propose a binding trial period of 2 to 3 elections followed by a vote to keep or reject that system. And I think what this reflects is a fear among some of our members of what an alternative to the status quo might be. Several of our members would like the opportunity to remove an elected politician from office. In terms of issues that affect seniors in those with disabilities, I mean, the diversity of health is greatest amongst kind of our membership, so seniors. And so disability-related needs must be considered in electoral reform. And in that respect, CARP has 3 specific asks as it relates to our members. Online telephone options should be explored, as well as other options to physically bring seniors with mobility issues to polling stations. But we are aware of elder abuse and the potential for vote manipulation by caregivers and family members that may not reflect an individual's actual choice. Campaign offices, debates, and public meetings should be physically accessible, and campaign material should be drafted in large font and plain language. Those are my introductory remarks, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Commanding Officer Gordon Dave Corbould, please, and Deputy Judge Advocate General ERRE Joshi. I don't know who's going first.
I will be, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll speak alone for the opening comments, and we're both here for questions during the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today regarding the experience of Canadian Forces electors in federal elections. I'm joined by a representative from the Office of the Judge Advocate General to my left here, Colonel ERRE Joshi. Part of the mission of the Military Personnel Command, in which I currently serve, is to support Canadian Armed Forces personnel in many areas. Commanding this command, Lieutenant General Whitecross, recently asked me to lend my support to the study of the proposals for amending the Canada Elections Act. It is in this context that I come before you today. In addition to his work as Deputy Judge Advocate General, Colonel Joshi to my left was also appointed the coordinating officer by the Minister of National Defence for the purpose of subsection 1991 of the Canada Elections Act. His role in this capacity is to work with the Chief Electoral Officer during and between elections on carrying out the special voting rules that apply to Canadian Forces electors. We will later tag team to answer your questions when appropriate, if this is acceptable. But first, I would like to make a few comments on voting by Canadian Forces electors. The Canada Elections Act gives special status to members of the regular force and members of the reserve force who are serving full-time on training or service or on active service. This status is not new. Indeed, in 1917, Parliament provided for special rules in order to allow members mobilized during the First World War to exercise their right to vote. Provisions to a similar effect have been maintained in electoral legislation to this day. They are now listed in Division 2 of Part 11 of the Canada Elections Act. If not for these provisions, Canadian Armed Forces members serving within Canada or throughout the world in various types of operations and exercises could find it very difficult to exercise their right to vote in the same way traditionally experienced by other Canadians. Dans une société démocratique comme
In a democratic society such as ours, the armed forces, like the public service, must remain politically neutral. This rule applies just as well to institutions as its members. For example, the Code of Values and Ethics of the Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces requires that members and public servants uphold Canada's parliamentary democracy and its institutions by notably carrying out their duties in accordance with legislation, policies, and directives in a non-partisan and objective manner. More specifically, the Queen's regulations and orders prohibit regular force members from taking an active part in the affairs of a political organization or party and making a political speech to electors or becoming a candidate for election to the Parliament of Canada or a provincial legislature. Given these limits imposed on Canadian Armed Forces members, with respect to the exercise of their democratic rights. Exercising their right to vote is one of the main vehicles for expressing their political opinions. Restricting their opportunities to exercise their right to vote would be tantamount to depriving them of their voice.
Second general election, 64,049 Canadian Armed Forces members were registered on voters' lists. Out of this number, a total of 29,247 Canadian Forces electors exercised their right to vote using the special voting rules provided by the Canada Elections Act. These votes were collected by military deputy returning officers, either at one of the 186 polling stations set up in various defense establishments across Canada, or abroad in nearly 80 countries and at sea on board Her Majesty's Canadian ships. These votes represented a participation rate of approximately 45%, but this percentage excludes members residing at the address indicated in their Statement of Ordinary Residence and who chose to exercise their right to vote at their civilian polling station on polling day. L'administration de vote des électeurs militaires.
Administering the vote of military electors is based on collaboration between the Chief Electoral Officer and his staff on the one hand, and the members appointed by the Minister of National Defence to the positions of Coordinating Officer and Liaison Officer on the other, as well as with the commanding officers of Canadian Armed Forces units and the deputy returning officers they appoint. The special voting rules dictating this type of collaboration have not been overhauled since 1993. The Speaker of the House of Commons recently received a report entitled An Electoral Framework for the 21st Century, Recommendations from the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada following the 42nd general election. Certain recommendations in this document specifically address voting by Canadian Armed Forces electors. We understand that this report has been referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs for review. Upon invitation, we will naturally support Parliament and the government with regard to the review of the recommendations it contains that affect the exercise of their right to vote by our personnel.
Your committee's mandate includes, among other things, the study of various voting systems, of mandatory voting, and of online and internet voting, and that you will also assess the extent to which these options are compatible with certain principles for electoral reform, namely effectiveness and legitimacy, engagement, accessibility and inclusiveness, integrity, and local representation. We are pleased to answer questions from the members of this committee on topics such as the way Canadian Armed Forces members are called to vote, the way in which the electoral process is administered by the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as the challenges we experienced in the last general election. We hope that this information will be of assistance to this committee in carrying out its mandate. Thank you again for offering us the opportunity to talk with you on this matter, and we'd be happy to answer your questions as appropriate.
Thank you, Brigadier General Corbould. I guess we'll go to our round of questioning. We'll start with Ms. Romanato, please, for 7 minutes. 7 minutes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our panelists for being here this evening, and thank you for the folks in the audience for hanging out in the hottest ticket in town, electoral reform. Donc, merci beaucoup pour votre présence ici ce soir.
Thanks very much for attending this evening.
General Corbould, we're delighted to have you here. It's the first time we have members of the Canadian Armed Forces in front of us, and we thought it was incredibly important that we make sure that the voices of our serving members are heard. And so I'd like to thank you and your colleagues for first their service to Canada and for being here this evening to provide us with this information that is incredibly important as a key stakeholder group for us. As I mentioned to you, I have 2 sons currently serving and had the pleasure of trying to figure out what the statement of residence was during the last election. So you touched on that a little bit. If you could elaborate to this committee the steps that a serving member would need to take in terms of setting up their address to correspond with their electoral riding. If you could explain that a little bit for the benefit of the committee, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I'll speak in broad terms and then allow Colonel Joshi to go to any specifics that I may have skipped over. In terms of statement of ordinary residence, primarily when as you get enrolled into the military during your recruitment phase, you declare your statement of ordinary residence, which for most of us as we join will not be the place where we go to a recruiting center. It'll be place primarily of where our family is from. So I was from Bella Coola, British Columbia. My parents, that's where they lived. I associated that with my statement of ordinary residence. Every year, we have an opportunity to change our statement of ordinary residence. I believe it's 2 months of the year, of which he'll correct me, I'm sure, where you can change your statement of ordinary residence, and that's generally a result of a posting. So if I posted from St. Albert to Ottawa, I might decide myself to change my statement of ordinary residence, or I might, as an individual, choose to maintain it at St. Albert, Alberta, depending on our personal circumstances and situation and ties to your location. In addition to that, I know that during an election, I'll pass over the details of the specific days, but during election, once a writ is dropped, then we are limited in changing our statement of residence during that time frame, obviously for affecting the election of the campaign. I'll hand over to Colonel Joshi to just clarify some dates.
So just a little bit of clarification on the subject of changing the statement of ordinary residence. It can be changed any time during the year, but it is not effective until 60 days after it's been received by the commanding officer. During an election period, as General Corbould mentioned, after the writ is dropped, if you move to change your statement of ordinary residence, it is not effective until 14 days after the election period. So during an election period, you cannot change a statement of ordinary residence. But there are places during the course of the year, your statement of ordinary residence can be changed to the place where you would live but for your military service, or the location where you are currently serving, or the location that you held immediately prior to enrollment. So there is some flexibility in aligning your statement of ordinary residence with your connection to the community.
Okay. Thank you. In your brief, you mentioned some of the challenges that we face, and I'm quite happy to see all of the efforts that are made to make sure that our members serving, especially abroad, are able to participate in the democratic process. And I wanted just to mention that was very helpful for you to mention that when we do have to advance the voting date for them, that it sometimes may prevent members from understanding or learning some things in the last minutes of the campaign and so on. So it was very helpful for you to provide us that information, because that's something we'll need to be mindful of, whatever it is that we decide to do. So I want to thank you both very much for filling us in on that regard. So my next question actually will be for Mr. Diaz. I just want to get some clarity on some of the statements that you made, and we have heard from your members throughout the tour. They seem to follow us because, as I said, we're the hottest ticket in town, I think, in terms of electoral reform. You mentioned, and I quote, over 60% of Canadians didn't vote for the governing party, and that on October 19th there was a referendum of change. And of course, then you talked about making false majorities impossible. So I'm a little confused, because on one hand, you're saying that we're a false majority and that 60% of the Canadians didn't vote for us, which I agree. That's, in fact, correct. But then you're saying that we have the mandate to then change the system. So I'm not sure which one it is. Is it the first one or is it the second one? Also, you said that people voted strategically because they didn't want a party. So if they voted strategically because they didn't want a party, i.e., I'm assuming the last government, that in itself is not then saying that we voted overwhelmingly because the three parties wanted reform. So I'm not sure which one it is. If you could clarify, please.
Gladly. If you take a look at the last federal election, it's clear. The debate across the country was change. No question about it. And so if you take a look at one of the issues that was debated was one of electoral reform. So you're right. We suggested to our members to vote strategically, and I think if you take a look at the numbers, 70% of Canadians voted strategically, and if you take a look at the numbers, 70% went to the ballot box. Well, first of all, went to the box to vote strategically, and then 70% said, who am I going to vote for that's best positioned to defeat a Conservative? That's my opinion, and that's frankly what the numbers seem to show. Now, the mandate is clear, in my opinion. Regardless of the system, the government should do what they ran on. And if a part of the system or of a part of your flat platform was eliminating first past the post, then you should do that. Because one of the frustrations with politics today is people will frequently run from the left and govern from the right, or in fact, when they get elected, their platform seems to disappear. So I think that there is enough, and even if you take a look at the pollings afterwards, it's clear that people are looking to get rid of the first past the post system. So I'm not giving an inconsistent message, but what I'm saying is the government should do what they said, and two, that's what Canadians are expecting.
Okay, thank you. We gotta go to Mr. Reid now.
Thank you.
Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions will be for Professor Lupia. Professor, I have to tell you, first off, you hit a raw nerve with your Pokemon Go comments. I am a level 26 Pokemon Go player with a 2200 combat power Snorlax in my Pokedex.
You shouldn't admit to that, Scott.
Just saying. However, in other regards, you seem to be a well-reasoned individual. So let me now ask you. Just with regard, I could hear you listening with, or I could see you listening with interest to the previous exchange. There has been a narrative presented, and Mr. Diaz has articulated it, that there is no reason to have a referendum on a new electoral system for Canada because the 2015 federal election was a de facto referendum on electoral reform because of the fact that both the Liberals, the New Democrats, and the Green Party collectively had positions in favor of changing the electoral system. These, of course, were not their entire platforms. They were part of what they articulated. Is it reasonable to treat elections as de facto referenda on any particular issue?
It's difficult to treat a candidate-based election or a parliament-based election as a referendum on a specific issue, because typically in one of those elections you're talking about a basket of issues, and some people, when they go to the polls, they're really worried about the economy, and some are really worried about, you know, maybe whether a particular factory in their town will stay open or closed, or others are worried about children or the elderly or things of that nature. So it's very difficult to take an election result and narrow it down to a single topic. If that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I wanted to turn to one of the papers you've written a number of papers that are germane to what we're discussing today. One which you co-authored with John Matsusuka 12 years ago in 2004 described how voters can be roughly grouped into three categories. And I was going to quote from it and then ask you for a comment on a concern that occurs to me. You wrote, the data showed respondents sorted themselves into three categories. The first category contained voters who knew neither the answers to detailed questions about the propositions nor about the insurance industry's preferences. This is in reference, parenthetically, to a referendum on the change to the insurance industry. The second category contained model citizens, voters who consistently gave correct answers to detailed questions about the initiatives and who knew the insurance industry's preferences. The third category contained respondents who could not answer questions about the proposition's details, but like the model citizens, knew the insurance industry's preferences. The study's central finding is that voters in the second and third categories voted in very similar ways, whereas voters in the first category voted quite differently. I think the evidence is convincing that both that well-informed voters vote in accordance with their what could be regarded as their true interests, and that those who know to turn to authority figures they know and trust are likely to do likewise. That's categories 2 and 3. Category 1, are these people sufficiently subject to being swayed by propaganda or in some other way manipulated so that they ruin everything for everybody else in a typical referendum?
I'll answer the question, but one of the reasons I'm hesitating right now is it depends on the relative numbers of these three groups, and that's not constant. So in a situation where you have a clearly stated question and you have leaders of political parties or interest groups that are well known, that are arraying themselves for and against in some sort of way that voters see as coherent, you're not going to have as many people in group one. You're not going to have as many people who are confused. Where group one can cause trouble is where things get just hard for them to comprehend. So this can be a situation where the question is so complicated that the interest groups, the traffic lights that they're looking for, they're not working, right? Or they're sending inconsistent messages, and so they can't really, take these information shortcuts and make the same decision. So that's when things get problematic. I will say, though, as a general rule, when voters get concerned or confused, they generally vote no. So, if they're most likely to, if you want to think about how they're most likely to cause trouble, it would be just by voting no.
There have been some referenda in Canada on this very issue, electoral reform. For example, one that took place in the province of Ontario in the year 2007 that have had quite low voter turnout. In the case of that referendum, it's quite striking that voter turnout for the election, which took place on the same day, people voted in the same location, had a substantially higher turnout. So two things occurred. One is that the electoral reform model that was proposed was only got about 35% of the vote. And secondly, voter turnout on that question was only about 35%, despite the fact that the overall voter turnout in the actual election was substantially higher. How are we to treat that kind of evidence? What does that tell us?
Well, there's a lot of variance worldwide in turnout in referenda. So if a referenda is phrased in a way where people see it as vital to their day-to-day life, they can easily imagine what a yes vote means to them and their family and what a no vote means, and they can feel it, right? That's the time when they turn out. But if it seems like this arcane and abstract type of thing that really isn't connected to their life and might be something that just elites are arguing about, that's when they stay away, right? That's when, even if they go to the polls to vote for another candidate, there's this idea of drop-off, where if a referendum is just too confusing or too abstract, they just wash their hands of it, right? So that's the main variation. The other thing that I'll say is when that happens, the people who are more likely not to turn out tend to be people who are lower in socioeconomic scale. So if you're worried about people who have less education or less income being part of this process, then if you have a situation where the referendum is confusing and the interest groups aren't telling people what's going on, the folks that are most likely not to participate would be lower SES and lower education.
That is one of our concerns. Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll go to Mr. Cullen now, please.
Thank you very much. I'll also stay with our professor for a moment. You enlightened me on a couple of things. One is that it sounds like politicians are kind of like traffic lights to voters on these things, and I hesitate to explore what signal Donald Trump is sending to you and other folks right now, because it confuses me. But you also suggested that the fear of change. Can you remind me again that in the California, and is this empirical or is it anecdotal, the notion that people are reluctant to sign up to campaigns unless they express a 70% or greater favorability of change at a year out, I think is what you told us?
Yeah. So here's what's empirical. If you look at referenda around the world, particularly national referenda, and you look at a year out or whenever the first date you announce we're going to put this on the ballot, you look at what's the percentage voting yes. In almost all cases, what happens is that support for yes goes down, right? There are very few cases where from that initial, because when you first launch a referendum, it's always like mom and apple pie, or like let's reform elections and make everything great. And people, okay, yeah, let's do that. But then the conversation comes, and then maybe the no ads come in where they say, oh, but this will ruin your life and it's very scary. So in almost all referendums, this is empirical, all referendum campaigns, almost all of them around the world, support goes down. So that's the empirical fact. Now, the anecdotal fact is there are these relatively small professional communities who run campaigns. And in California, there's a very active one around referenda. So this is a rule of thumb. There's a bunch of people whose reputations and compensation depends on win-loss, right? And so when you're in a room with those guys, when you're at conferences with those guys, I mean, we can, you know, they just, if you're 55 or 60% yes a year in advance, that's a danger sign, right? Because they're pretty sure that one's not going to win.
Thank you, and that's sobering, I suppose, is the term that I'm looking for. I'll turn to Brigadier General Corbould. I was just sorry I had to step out. I was on the phone with Bella Bella, I think a place you perhaps have some familiarity with. But I want a specific question. The military in our history has been a place, in a sense, by necessity, we've innovated. We had women voting, mothers and of those serving in the First World War. I believe we had testimony that way. We had the age of voting lowered for servicemen and women the very first time. One of the innovations we're contemplating is online voting. I may have missed it in your testimony because I was in and out a bit. What contemplations would you give to enable a higher participation rate of our men and women serving overseas in particular? Because their vote would seem to be as important, if not in some ways a lot more important, to be counted in a general election.
Indeed, our common theme and our default is always to make sure that pretty much as many of our soldiers as possible have access to voting within the special voting rules. So we go through great effort working with the government to make sure that those votes and that capability to vote is there. Any developments that Canada Elections decides to move forward on, we would assist and take a look at it and see how we could apply it to military.
The big downside, of course, with online voting is security, the ability to keep our networks secure. We've had testimony at an open mic in which somebody who had spent time working for the federal government, including the Department of Defense, said keeping an internet-based system secure is near to impossible right now. Would the military offer us any advantages, perhaps in testing on small scale, the ability to keep something like that secure and the vote sacred?
Yes, sir. I'm not in a position to be able to answer that specifically. I'm certainly not a computer expert by any means.
Sure.
So I'm not sure on how we would approach that.
Okay. To Mr. Diaz, I won't call you Jerome ever. One of the things I think you suggested in your initial testimony was the idea of perhaps the stars lining up, or that the occasion for reform is rare. And it is, in fact, rare when you have a government come into office with the commitment to change the system that got them into office.
That's right.
Despite the Prime Minister's musings last week that maybe the heat's gone off this issue, that it's not important anymore because people are happy. I don't know why one would lead to the other, but as the membership that you represent, have they suddenly, is there now an appearance that they say, well, as Madam Ambrose said, the bad man is gone, so everything's fine. Our interest in changing the way we vote and our votes are counted is also gone.
We had over 2,000 members at a convention in August. So that was after the change of government. And what did we talk about? We talked about proportional representation and passed unanimously. Because the stars are aligned, candidly. 3 of the 4 parties that are sitting here today are in favor of eliminating first past the post. And you can't detract from that. And the reality is, and I'm just going to repeat myself, when parties get elected, whether I agree or disagree with their platform is irrelevant. But if they run on a platform, then they should implement it. And that's my point. And our members haven't changed our position as a result of that.
Things we're looking for in what we put out to Canadians is through the perspective of a voter, what experience they have going to the polls, what satisfaction do they leave with, that their vote, as you say, counted for something. 9 million didn't count last time, but also on the policies that come out the other end. One of the things about first past the post is we get these big policy lurches. And I'm wondering, just on the impact of labor law that you deal with, or economic policy, manufacturing policy, is there any benefit to be seen in having a form of system that doesn't policy lurch every 5 to 10 years going the opposite direction that we were just running in?
Well, there's no question. I mean, there's been a dramatic shift in the last year than in the previous 10,
right.
One can argue. I will argue that minority governments act differently than majority governments. The facts is that the majority of Canadians deserve to have their voice heard. I mean, whether people agree or disagree with the position that was taken on strategic voting, I mean, strategic voting is inherently, there's something wrong with it. When people go to a ballot box and they're voting against something, because you have to vote against something in order to have the type of change that you want. So, I mean, people are expecting to go to the ballot box and their vote means something. So at the end of the day, if one party gets 10%, they get 10% of the seats. Another party gets 20%, they get 20% of the seats. But a party that gets less than 40% of the seats, regardless of their political stripe, or regardless of if I support them or not, should not have a majority government. So I would suggest that if every vote counts, then you end up with the type of government that will speak on behalf of the majority of Canadians, and I think they'll be more satisfied with that.
Merci. On va passer maintenant à M. Thériault.
Now give the floor to Mr. Thériault. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some trouble. Everyone knows that my political party is in favor of the change, not any type of change, and not in any manner. We do have a favorable prejudice in favor of self-determination, and this is valid both for people and for electors. And here we are talking about the principle of whether or not there should be consultation of the population so that it can express its free and informed consent to a change of the democratic rules. If we are talking about the principle here, it seems to me that we have to be attentive to not making presumptions or assumptions about what the intelligence of the elector is. Of course, if we are working within the timetable that has been set aside, it's a bit of an aberration. We engaged in consultations all over the country, and it would be difficult to implement something. But if we give ourselves the time to do things properly by 2019, and we are able to come up with a formula where there is a supplementary question on the election, on the ballot, it seems to me, I think we can trust in the intelligence of the people so that they can give their view. And I think that you probably would agree with me, Mr. Fitch. Why do we are asking for the people to express their views? It's because everyone who has come here either in favor or against the change has taken a position that there are drawbacks and there are advantages to each type of system. This is not a debate for experts. It's not a political debate. It's not a debate that's to be reserved to the initiated. It's something that should be decided by the people, and they're the ones that will have to make a decision about what are the drawbacks and advantages that they wish to assume. If they're in favor of the present system, Mr. Fitch, I'm sure you wouldn't be against a referendum where this voice is expressed in the referendum. You said that it's only insofar as that we are envisaging a change that we should present this to the people. In view of the fact that an assembly of the people has given a mandate to the committee to examine this question, in both cases, I think then the people are going to have to express their view and make a decision. Realistically speaking, it's not possible to do this by the 1st of December. We cannot have a consensus by the 1st of December. And electors will have to be informed and better informed, and will have to take the time to do things properly. That's the first point. The second point, in relation to the principle, we talked about the principle of change, and I think that majority, speaking for the majority, we've heard people say that what we need is a proportional representation system. We could be in favor of the principle of proportional representation. That is one matter. But it's something different to define this model, because in the modeling, this is where partisan elements may appear. Every year, for example, we can think of the Electoral Boundaries Act and how the electoral boundaries may be changed. 2012, for example, if we'd had the 2011 boundaries, then we wouldn't have been able to elect anyone. That is a question of detail, but if it seems to me hard to understand why we are not able to agree on the principle that this debate belongs to the people, that the decision must be made by the people in a referendum. I don't understand why there's this principle that we say that you, the committee, have the duty to make a decision instead of the people. This is not my concept of democracy. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen?
Réponds en premier.
If I could just jump in, because you referenced my name there. And I wish I'd met the professor before the last election, because we had to have a ballot question, and our ballot question was yes or no on the development of shale gas in the province of New Brunswick. And in my opinion, the people voted no, because we were kicked out, and the Gallant administration went in. And people, after the fact, once they get more information, they kind of said, well, I didn't have enough information at the time. I was uncertain. I had heard things on social media that I wasn't happy about, and it made me uncertain, so I voted no. Now, some people said, didn't have anything to do with the referendum. I just hated your guy. Well, what did you hate about him? Well, I don't know. I just didn't like him. So they voted against the person. But I know going into that election, we knew that there was only about 50% of the population in favor of extracting natural gas in non-conventional ways. So we were, if I'd known it had to be 70% before we started, maybe we would have tried to run something a little bit different, but at least it made a ballot question, and it made people make those decisions. So, people vote for different reasons, and sometimes they vote contra to a position or a person, and a lot of times they vote against as much as they vote for. And that's where, a platform has things like, let's do certain reforms and review it. Again, some people who voted for you may not have voted for that particular piece in the platform. And that's why you need to go back and get the reaffirmation, especially if you're doing something as grandiose as going away from first past the post. You have to go back and check, because that's how you elect your governments. And if a government makes a decision that disadvantages other parties, and maybe that's why you look at why are certain parties pushing for this, because it will advantage them. Well, that can be misconstrued as rigging the voting system. So that's where you have to have clear and concise information to go back to the people and say, we're going to change it in this manner. Do you agree with that way to form your next government? And maybe
we're going to have to go to Ms. May now.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I'll start with Brigadier General Corbould. I just wondered, do you have any statistics on what was the participation rate of members of the armed forces in the election, given the difficulties you describe, and certainly well known to, by the way, you should know that Sherry Romanato sticks up for the armed forces every chance she gets, just putting that in. She's got, she wants to have more kids in the armed forces because it's more votes for her, but that's not, it's not why. But how many members of our armed forces did manage to vote in the election? Do you know, is that a figure we know? 20.
Yes, ma'am. Using the special voting polls stations, it was 29,247. What we don't know is how many individuals actually used their local polling station based on their statement of ordinary residence, and that's an individual choice made by the member.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn to Wanda and Wade from CARP. By the way, you do have a very impressive organization on so many issues. You do provide real service to parliamentarians in giving us good data. Do you, in looking at the high proportion of your membership that's familiar with issues of electoral reform, did you have any way of double-checking that in the questions you asked them? Were they self-identified as well-informed? Did you test that in any way with asking them specific questions? We've had, I think it was Forum Research told us that the general population across Canada, only 40% of Canadians actually know that we currently use first past the post.
So In this particular survey, we gave lots of opportunity for comment. So we were looking for qualitative response as well as just kind of checking tick boxes, because we wanted to test that, but we also wanted to get something that we may have missed when we bring their views here to you today. And what we also did at the big outset of our survey is we gave a brief description of the different options available. So some of our members said, we're informed because of what you gave to us. And it was minimal, but there was some information there on the various systems. So I think when our members say they're informed, generally they are somewhat informed, like they tell us.
Yeah, and I also represent a riding. I think Saanich Gulf Islands has the 5th highest proportion of seniors within the riding, and I have a lot of CART members, and they're always extremely well informed. Did you have any other specific sense of why the majority of those who understood the choices for electoral reform trended towards supporting proportional representation? Was there any way to figure out what their reasons were, what values they were attaching to that when they gave you the answers they gave you?
I think it was just to have their vote count. What we found in this survey is that our members were split on a lot of the key issues, but it wasn't kind of a close split. There was some kind of far to one side and some far to the other. So we had lots of divergent views, but having their vote matter, I think, was one of the key views that we heard kind of repeatedly on the pro-proportional representation side. And of course, that the government had campaigned on that, so they were questioning, why is this at issue now, is what we saw as well.
Thank you. I'm going to turn with the time I have to Mr. Fitch, and I hope you won't mind because I don't think you intended anything. Well, your turn of phrase, people own democracy. Politicians don't own democracy. I've searched in my mind to think if I've ever heard of anyone refer to democracy as a commodity before. So I don't think you intended to offend me, but I was offended. I thought about Aristotle said, if liberty and equality, as is thought by some, are chiefly found in democracy, they will best be attained when all persons alike share in the government to the utmost, which I think we could distill, as Abraham Lincoln said, government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. He didn't say owned by the people. So I see democracy in a much more relational aspect, much more participatory, much more active. And it really, the point of democracy is to ensure that the will of the people is affected by those whom they elect. So if you became Premier of New Brunswick, would you make every decision by referendum, or which ones would you think you needed a referendum, and when would you trust that the will of the legislature was okay?
Yeah, and if I offended you, I thought, I didn't mean to, but the point I was trying to make is that if a politician thinks that they can make a unilateral decision that could determine the outcome of the next elections to their favor for forever and ever, that's where the people need to have a say. So and that's where you, if I could just finish my point. So that again is where if you're leaving a method of voting, a method of creating governments that has been fundamental and used for many, many years, that's why I think you should have affirmation from the people that, yes, this is what we wanted when we understood what that plank in the platform was. And yes, I've personally, I'll never be the Premier of the province of New Brunswick, so I won't get past that. But again, when it comes to things as important as how we elect our government, that's where you need to have the people's reaffirmation on that. That's why I would have a referendum.
I think I'm out of time, Mr. Chair.
About a minute.
Oh, good. My clock was too fast. I would ask then whether when for instance, the previous government under Stephen Harper decided to change the Elections Canada rules such that the longer the election campaign took, the more money accrued to all parties. That was a specific benefit to one party, but it was applied equally to all parties. But it was that the timing of that election being 11 weeks was part of Fair Elections Act changes. Those weren't taken to people. Or when Manitoba or in the past New Brunswick had had multi-member ridings. That was never taken to a referendum. So we've changed a lot of things about elections acts. We've changed our voting before. We've had the extension of the vote to women, to ethnic minorities, to First Nations. We've never held referenda on those. I mean, I know the argument can be made, and Mr. Reid makes it well, but there's no constitutional requirement for a referendum. And we have changed our voting system in Canada in the past without resort to referenda. So is that the only category of decisions that you think have to go to the people before a legislature makes a decision, when it's a clear parliamentary decision to be made?
Briefly, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and again, you know, I can speak to what goes on in New Brunswick and where we've used referendum in different parts, and we've gone to the people on amalgamations of communities, which again is indirectly how they will vote to represent the people that spend their tax dollars. And some have said yes, some have said no, that they want to stay where it is. So again, it is one of those points of the debate, and there are some people that are saying there needs to be that ask, and others that are saying that there shouldn't be. So, and that's where I make that point.
Mr. De Courcy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, to our Brigadier General and Colonel, thanks very much for being here. I have the pleasure of serving the riding where base Gagetown is located, so I'm certainly aware of the issues of exercising franchise for women and men who serve in uniform. So I appreciate your concerns that were brought here today, and I know this committee and other committees of the House will have the opportunity to discuss in depth how we can better assure that military members are able to vote. And to Mr. Fitch, Bruce, thanks very much, and let me congratulate you on the 2 years that you served as interim leader for the Progressive Conservatives in the province, and I wish you and your new leader, Blaine Higgs, all the best of luck as the House returns into session next week. I would, however, be a bit loath to compare this process here to the one in New Brunswick. Here we had a government that committed to engaging with Canadians and to working with all the parties, and you see all the parties assembled around here coming to some form of agreement on what we can offer to Parliament. And the situation in New Brunswick, unfortunately, saw both the opposition parties run away from a process proposed by the government. All the same, I know that there will be robust debate going on at home, and certainly looking forward to see how that turns out. Mr. Diaz, if I can return to some of your testimonies, particularly around the polls that were commissioned recently and how we read those. I've heard a lot from certain people who've come in front of this committee, testimony to the effect of clearly there's a consensus and absolutely people want this, but the polling, the testimony indicates that yes, there's an interest in electoral reform, and we'd be naive and ignorant to suggest otherwise. But at the same time, if I go to the ECOS poll and I read the statement that respondents were asked to respond to on a sliding scale of 1 to 7, the first question was, or the first statement was, electoral reform is something the Liberal Party campaigned on, so they should deliver on this promise. 59% agree, either 5, 6, or 7 out of 7. Now, that hardly surprises me that people think a government should fulfill its promises, hardly at all. The second statement is electoral reform is too important to be rushed. The process should be slowed down and subjected to more public consultations. 57% of respondents, either 5, 6, or 7 out of 7, agree. The third question, electoral reform, is crucially important and should not be delayed for another election cycle. 47%, 5, 6, or 7 out of 7, agree. It tells us that there are a variety of opinions on how this issue should be addressed. And then when we go to the preferred form of electoral reform, we've got 43% of respondents suggesting that proportional representation is the best option for Canada, 29% for first past the post, and 26% for preferential ballot, which leads me to think that, again, there's a diffuse and diverse view of exactly how this issue should be addressed. Is it not more fair to say that we need to address this with some level of modesty, work together across partisan lines, understanding that there's no clear consensus on how we should move forward on this issue, and do our best in a smart, possibly incremental way, find a solution and bring Canadians on board?
Which of the 9 statements would you like me to deal with first? Let's see.
I can
Here, hold on.
I can address the forum poll that said that only 48% of Canadians think we should move forward with electoral reform. There's a variety of opinion out here.
No question.
And I think it's dangerous for us to move forward thinking that clearly there's a consensus in any one direction. We need to understand that there's a diversity of views and address that with some level of modesty.
There's a difference between clear consensus and unanimous consent. First of all, you're never going to find unanimous agreement on this issue. If we found a unanimous agreement on this issue, then I would suggest we'll be starring in the next version of Mission Impossible. But this is an important subject, and I agree nobody should rush it. And I believe that there has to be broad-based consultation. And what I would suggest, the government has done that. But I would suggest to you that it takes real guts and ownership for a government that benefited by the first past the post to have the courage to change it. Because they said that that was a part of their platform. So to me, that is something that Canadians will understand and something that Canadians would respect. So do we need to have broad-based consultation? Yes. I think there's a check mark. Do we need to have, what's your terminology, clear consensus? I think you do. I think 4 of the 5 parties are expecting some type of a change. So if you take a look at the elected parliamentarians, I would suggest you have a clear consensus.
Professor Lupia.
A clear consensus to go exactly where? And do exactly what?
Well, the consensus is to eliminate the first past the post. We would trust those on the committees to make the recommendation of what the best way is to proceed.
Sir Lupia seemed to be wanting to jump in. I don't know, Mr. De Courcy, was that correct? Did you want to jump in, Professor Lupia?
Oh, no.
Okay, just you seemed to be reacting to. Anyway, I'm sorry, Mr. De Courcy, to interrupt you. We'll give you a bit more time there.
No, I appreciate the comments, and I think it's dangerous for us to think that that there is any one view guiding us in one particular direction on this issue. Our friends from CARP reminded us that there perhaps is no consensus on how we should move forward, so we need to take care to deliberate intelligently as a committee. Put the sloganeering aside and come to a recommendation or a set of recommendations that will be palatable for the largest number possible of Canadians.
Is
2 seconds.
Maybe not a minute, maybe like
50
25 seconds would be okay.
And when we did talk about electoral reform in New Brunswick, I said to the Premier at the time, don't bring closure to the legislature today on the Friday. Let's come back and debate electoral reform on Tuesday. But they let the motion die on the order paper and went and did something else and brought closure for the summer.
Interesting. Mr. Reid, you want to split with Mr. Richards? Is that
please, if possible?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to return to Professor Lupia for a moment, if I could. One of the features of referendum campaigns in the United States, and I would suggest also of election campaigns, is much more substantial spending on the part of the various participants than is the case here in Canada. I noticed in one of your papers you make reference to the signature gathering component of an initiative in California, typically amounting to around $1 million of cost just for that part of the campaign. And I also note that in your discussion, I'm referring again, this is, by the way, is the paper I referred to earlier, the one you co-authored with Matsusuka. You pointed out that when they are very substantially funded, the No campaign can develop, you don't use the term an unfair advantage, but they can develop an advantage that is pretty substantial. On page 471 of your paper, you say, voters prefer to stick with policies whose consequences they have experienced, namely the policies that continue when initiatives lose, rather than risk voting for a new initiative whose consequences might be very bad. Thus, spending vast sums of money to defeat an initiative may make voters sufficiently confused and uncertain that they vote against it. You then go on to point out that there's no similar advantage to spending vast amounts of money in favor of an initiative, which would be relevant, I guess, if you're talking about initiatives on things like changes to the insurance industry, et cetera. Can you give me an idea of the kinds of dollars you're talking about in a let's use California because it is a Canada-sized jurisdiction, same population more or less as we have. What kinds of dollars would we be talking about on the no side when they've been successful in stopping an initiative?
So again, as a general matter, you can have referenda where there's nothing spent, and you can have huge amounts spent. In the insurance case that you referenced earlier, that was amazing because there were 5 different referenda to reform the insurance industry on the ballot in one state in California, and the amount of money spent for and against those 5 referenda was more money that was spent in the presidential election nationally that was happening at the same time, right? The hard money. There were some soft money expenditures, but it was comparable. So you had a debate in one. So at the time, this was late 80s, so you had maybe $85 million spent by both sides in the presidential campaigns in the hard money and 88 spent on these 5 initiatives. You can, on certain initiatives, have let's say $100 million spent. There's been innovation in the U.S. about presidential campaigns, so now they're spending $1 billion. Obama spent over $1 billion on both of his. There are no referendum campaigns getting anywhere close to that, but you can get in the $150, $200 million range at the top end.
Thank you. I raise that because I think people like my colleague, Mr. Cullen, who are referring to the impact that money can have on campaigns may not be aware of the vast difference between the dollars that are likely to be spent here in Canada should we have a referendum on electoral reform on the pro or con side. We also, unlike the United States, have the capacity, and this is why I'm asking this question, we have the capacity to amend our referendum law to reflect the rules we have in our election law, which places very strict limits. You can't go over, for example, a $1,500 Canadian dollar donation to any party in an election. One could put similar restrictions. Indeed, they exist in some provincial legislation. So we would be talking about numbers that are, I would think, well, I shouldn't put an exact number, but they'd be a small fraction of what they are in the States. In that kind of environment, is the ground pro and con leveled? I guess it must be to some degree, but how much does that level the playing field?
Well, in terms of campaigning, the no campaign just always has this advantage if they can make their case well, because if you vote no, you continue with something known. At the time of the campaign, yes is an imaginary thing. Yes is this virtual world, this thing that has to be described to you. No one has lived it before. So the modus operandi for a no campaign is to find a worst case scenario and run with it. And so that, it's very easy to do that if you know what scares voters. The yes campaign has to find a simple, urgent, and direct message to try and relate it to people's lives. So it can be done, but it's harder. But I would say just if 2 sides are given equal amounts of money, the no side still has this advantage because it's just built in, because they are advocating for something that people have lived through, while the yes side is advocating for something that at least at the moment people can only imagine.
All right, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Maybe I should let Mr. Richards do the remaining part.
A minute and a half.
Oh, sorry about that, Blake.
That's okay. Not a problem. Not a problem. It's, I'm a generous guy. What can I say? I guess the question that I had, you'll all have to be brief with your responses, I suppose, but I wanted to ask of each of you. Some of you have alluded to it and mentioned, but just wanted to see positions that any of the organizations would have on online voting and mandatory voting. I know I heard some allusion from some to it, but haven't really got positions from anyone specifically. So I don't know if you want to start, Mr. Fitch, and then work our way across.
Sure. The online voting, I can imagine that it is something that is going to eventually come. I made note of the computer glitches that we had when we used modern technology in the last election, and it was just we didn't have the results till the next day on some of these. So what was supposed to be a advancement turned out to be a real concern, because people were concerned that there was a rigging, or that there was a problem with the machinery. And again, security is always an issue when you talk about online. Mandatory voting, that's people have rights and freedoms to choose to vote or not to vote, and that's why, again, if we force them to vote, that starts moving into a heavy-handed and takes away that freedom of choice that we've all find so important.
I'm here.
With respect to the online voting, I think if we look at our members' behavior in other areas, surprising numbers of seniors, and particularly elderly seniors, are not online, do not have access to computers, are not comfortable with an electronic environment. And even those who are online are reluctant to make important transactions online. Mm-hmm. So, for example, many of them refuse to pay their CARP membership electronically. With respect to, and it's such good value, with respect to mandatory voting, we had a few comments on that, but nothing I feel like I could share.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll have to move on now to Mr. Aldag, please.
It's going to be Ruby, and then I'm going last.
Okay, go ahead.
We've been messed up today.
Okay, Ms. Sahota.
Thank you. And thank you for all the witnesses that are here today. My first question, I've never actually, in all the months we've been doing this, asked a lot of questions about referendum, but you've brought up some interesting points, Professor Lupia. I'd want to get your opinion a little bit about, you have quite a lot of states that are now using an instant runoff method in the United States currently. Have any of these states, have there been any local referendums held before they changed to this system? Or we haven't heard quite all that much about the United States since we've been comparing ourselves to other parliamentary countries. So if you could shed some light on that for me, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the true answer to your question is I don't know, just because of the thousands of local jurisdictions that we have. I don't know about all of them. I know that at the state level, there is a tendency to, in half of the states, if you want to amend the state constitution, you would go through a referendum, right? So these types of questions would often be constitutional rather than statutory. So it would be normal in half of the states to go through this process. They tend to be the western states. The older states do not have the referendum process for this purpose, and they could make these types of decisions just through legislative action. So I'm sorry, there's variance at the state level. It's very decentralized. The Constitution of the U.S. gives very few it leaves to the states the manner of how they decide these things.
So there's a whole bunch of states, from what I can see currently, that are using this alternative voting system now, but you haven't heard of any referendums at the state level regarding this. Is that correct? So at the local level, this is happening. At the state level, we have tens of thousands of municipal governments, so okay. I'm just not familiar with all of them. Okay. My next question is along the lines of, we've been discussing referendum quite a lot on this committee, and, whether referendum is necessary to give this scale of reform legitimacy or not, and also the timing of a referendum. So there's been some discussion around the fact whether you have the referendum up front, or whether you have it 2 or 3 election, or 1, 2, or 3 even has been suggested, election cycles after. So you give people, the voters, an opportunity to not prejudge a system, but to have been through the system and then decide on whether it produces better results or not. Have you looked into that aspect of referendum at all, and what are your opinions on it?
Worldwide, most referenda are one-off affairs. You announce a certain date, you have a vote, and then that's the end of it. Now, in some cases, people will revisit it later on, but it's not a planned revisitation. In some U.S. states, however, this is like Massachusetts and some of the older states. For some types of referenda, you have 2 votes, and you have to have a majority over successive elections. So you would have, like in Massachusetts, I think if you want to have a constitutional amendment, you have to get a majority. Let's say you and I wrote a referendum and it got on the ballot. We'd have to get a majority in 18 and then a majority again in 20, right? That's, I think, for a small set of constitutional. So that's the type of thing where it's prolonged. But worldwide, typically you announce a single date and then you have the vote at that time.
Well, how about, I'm not saying that you would have to have it up front and then again revisit it once again later. You could do that, that's an option. But how about just changing the system and then having the referendum after the fact?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
If the government was, to put this to the legislature, it was voted on, we found legitimacy in that, we go ahead and make the reforms that are needed, and then in order to, really legitimize the process, we put it to the people after an election process a cycle has taken place, whether it's 1 election cycle or 2, and then the referendum was to occur.
Yeah, so there's no precedent for that in the United States, but worldwide there are different types of referenda. The situation you've described is quite rare, where you enact a change and then ask for a vote later. What's more common is you have an advisory referendum, where like you could have that first, we say, we're going to put this out to a vote, we're not going to implement it yet, and it's not going to count. We just want to get a sense of the people. So that's a little more common as an alternative to the normal referenda where you vote on it and you implement it. The case that you've described, it happens, but it's pretty rare. Governments, once they invest in a change like this, typically there's a reticence to put it out there and change it. So it's happened, but it's really rare.
Okay, thank you. My next question, do I have a little bit more time? Okay, perfect. My next question is to Brigadier General Corbould. I know that you had suggested in your introduction that there are some challenges that the armed forces do face when it comes to voting. You've mentioned some of them, but I think you ran out of time and you said you revisit in the question period of other challenges that you think we can accommodate or, look to changing.
Aware of, I'll hand over to Colonel Joshi, who's the monitor of the last election.
So one set of challenges we have is time periods. In terms of our military vote period is from days 14 before the election to day 9, and it's to get the material out in time. So I'd say deployed operations. We have operations going on all around the world, and to ensure that Elections Canada and we can get the elections material to the members in time, and to get the materials back. So that's sort of a time period challenge. Deployed our exercises. It's not always that members are near the military polling stations. So we have to make sure that we can get a polling station near our members during the time period. So sometimes we have to ask for variances from the time period to allow the vote to happen a little bit before or a little bit after the military period, or the hours of the polling stations. Not people work on shifts and different routines, so we have to make sure that the polling stations are open long enough for people to vote. Other challenges we might have are ships at sea, or we almost had this time a submarine underwater during the election period, and it's hard to get the information to a submarine when it's underwater. So to try to plan that the exercises or the deployments happen around that election period, that's another challenge that we have to deal with. Also, our SOR process, Statement of Ordinary Residence process, it changes. People might only realize that they wish to change their Statement of Ordinary Residence once the writ is dropped, but of course it can't be effective until 14 days after the election's completed. So those are, very briefly, some of the challenges that we face.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madame Sans Souci.
Merci.
Madame Sans Souci. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses. More specifically, Ms. Morris, this is the second time today that I've had an opportunity to hear as a witness before a House of Commons committee. Rather surprising. I'd like to put the first question to you and to your colleague. In addition to the fact that you represent 300,000 members in 50 sections, you also represent electors that have the highest participation rate in elections and who have been voting for the longest period of time. So we could expect that they would like to retain the status quo, but the majority of your members express a wish to see a reform in the system, and they are very much engaged in this process of electoral reform. You told them that their main reason is the feeling that it is important for each vote to count. But in addition to this principle, what do you think their other motivations would be for electoral reform?
Comments that we received in the poll.
Je peux poser une autre question pendant que vous cherchez.
I can put another question while you're looking for them then. While you're looking for this answer, I'd like to put another question then to Professor Lupia. You told us that the status quo in a referendum does have an advantage because it is easier to campaign against change. A campaign in favor of a change means that you have to win over people and convince them that the future will be better. In this particular case, we're talking about an instance of reform. We might conclude that the status quo is not an option in a reform. Does this mean that we avoid the particular pitfall that you mentioned if we were to propose to citizens the choice between two new systems, new electoral systems?
Traditional referendum, usually there's one proposal put forward and people vote yes or no. If that wasn't on the table, then the status quo, that dynamic would not be present. Then it would be more like a candidate campaign where you have, ostensibly two new people.
Je vous remercie. Est-ce que vous avez trouvé?
Thank you. Did you find what the main motivation then was in your answer?
We've already shared a couple of the comments. I think the other one that's come through is just a concern that a relatively small percentage of electors would be able to vote for and elect a majority government.
Je vous remercie. Mes dernières questions vont être adressées à...
My last question is for Mr. Diaz. I thought it was quite interesting that you shared the consultation report, the consultation that you held relating to this electoral reform. The interesting thing on your side is that since it expresses your members, you can qualify your responses. I think that this comment was made by a young person, by someone else, but you were able, for example, to note that many people have the feeling that their vote does not have any importance or doesn't count. And this is a point that was made by young workers in particular. I think that this is interesting because, as you already noted, we do not often change the reform of the voting system. It doesn't happen very often in democracy. In your consultation report, you say that the groups that feel excluded from the electoral system are the indigenous people, people of color, young people, the homeless, women, people with a disability, as seniors who are in care. So I'd like to know what is the most important thing for workers relating to electoral reform, and why do they consider that is important for them to speak for those who are excluded from the system at the present time?
Us people understand that politics affects everything. The economy, decisions made by governments. So I think we're at a time where people want more say, or they want to be listened to. So I think you will find that in our consultation with our members, we did more than just meet with a National Executive Board, which 19 out of 25 are rank and file, shop floor workplace, and then have also the debate at our convention. But we also had numerous public forums internally. In Port Elgin, we have an education center where we had over 400 members talking about electoral reform. We have youth committees. We have workers of disability committees. We have workers of color. We have Aboriginal worker of color committees. So we have had broad-based consultations with our members. And what did we use is the dialogue questions were actually drawn from your guide to hosting a successful dialogue on Canadian electoral reform, which was put out by the government. So it really is about a broad-based understanding that politics affects everything, whether or not it's the issue in the environment, whether or not we can start to walk through the whole host of initiatives. Politics is important, and I think people want to participate in it.
OK, fait, dans le fond, ce que nous dites, c'est que...
In other words, what you were saying, that is that these particular groups, they are ones that say that they feel that they are excluded from the system. They're not workers who are saying that those people feel excluded. They themselves testified about their feeling of exclusion from the system. Did I understand correctly? Yes. What appears to me clear from the comments that you have made to us is this feeling that people are not represented in the present system. What would you say their priorities are if they were to feel well represented?
Our members represent the communities. And so if I will take a look at a breakdown of our membership for the purpose of the discussions, I will have many that will come to a monthly union meeting. And many won't participate because of family obligations or whatever. However, we also have other members that will participate on environment committees or who will participate in social events. So people have different interests, but we come together as a collective. And that's, that's what the labor movement is about a coming together of collectives. So people are going to have different ideas, but people just want to be heard. People want to participate. They might not want to participate by coming to a membership meeting, but boy, they're going to come to a ratification meeting, or they're going to go to a proposal meeting, or people want to make sure they're heard.
Thank you. Okay, Monsieur Reyes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Mr. Reyes. Thank you, Chairman. My first question will be for Professor Lupia. I'd like to know your opinion on what I am saying here. When we know that the electoral platform of the Liberal government, to quote a journalist today, there were approximately 350 electoral promises, and we add this to the hundreds of promises made by the two other parties that expressed a desire for a change to the electoral system. We add all this together, and Mr. Diaz says that, and I think that he's probably fairly right. I don't know whether we can say that it's 70%, but there are a lot of people that did vote in favor of change because the previous government had already been in power for 10 years. With your experience, would you be of the view that this is a clear message that was sent by the population expressing a desire for a change to the method of voting, because this was one promise among hundreds, considering the context in Canada? Do you think that the government does have a clear mandate to change the system of voting without necessarily consulting the population?
So I'll give a blunt answer. The first answer is I don't know, because to answer that question, I'd want to get high-quality survey data to try and find out why different people voted for things. But I can just say as a technical matter, when we vote for candidates in an election, it's not like going to the grocery store. It's not like going inside the grocery store. It's like going to the front of the grocery store and someone hands you a basket full of fruit and vegetables and cereal and whatnot, and somebody else has a different basket basket. So if you and I were going into the store, we might just get our favorite types of foods and pick those. But this would be like going to the supermarket and 2 people have already prepared a basket and we have to pick one, right? So in an election, it's very difficult to say that the reason that the electorate, chose a particular candidate is because they had a strong feeling about a particular issue, right? Some people may have felt very strongly about change, but other people may have felt strongly about the economy or about inequality or about, social issues or things of that nature. So as a general matter, it's hard to find one issue that is the reason that a majority cast a vote. And for me, it's impossible to do without data.
Je pense que vous avez répondu.
I think that you did indirectly answer my question. Thank you. Mr. Diaz and Ms. Morris and Mr. Poziomka. I'd like to hear your comments on what I'll be saying. Generally speaking, most of the groups that we've heard from, I wouldn't say that it's all of the meetings, but probably about 2/3 of them where there were witnesses. All the groups that were clearly in favor of a change in the method of voting, particularly proportional representation, and who were clearly against the idea of a referendum, said that the reason for their position that there was a fairly clear consensus in favor of change, and they talked about survey data to justify their position. I would say that nearly all the surveys that were conducted in recent months, where Canadians were asked whether they were in favor of a referendum, in each case, they were in favor of a referendum. I would say more than 50%. Well, I'd like to know why all the polls or surveys that you've cited would be valid to justify it, but not those that surveyed the entire population.
So our surveys are not statistically significant, and we don't pretend to say that they reflect the views of the entire population. We simply poll all our members, invite them all to poll, and depending on the topic and their level of interest, we'll see somewhere between 2,000 and 10,000 respondents. So I'm sharing with you what our members said, not something reflective of the larger electorate.
Donc, sachant ça, ce que vous me dites.
Knowing this, then, what you would tell me, if these scientific polls were conducted, demonstrate that the majority of Canadians are in favor of a referendum, would you agree with the fact that in the final resort, if the government were to propose a reform system, it would be a good idea to survey the population to find out if it is in favor of this? Why should we not take into account then the results of such surveys?
To be clear, our poll actually did support a referendum, but it was 53% in favor of a referendum.
Donc, vous seriez en faveur comme organisation?
So, as an organization, would you be in favor?
I think that's a strong enough consensus to strike a position. So we're here really to share the views of our members, not to advocate for a particular position.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Diaz, je suis certain que...
Mr. Diaz, I think that you'd probably be happy to answer the question.
Because if we started to do everything by referendum, my guess is C-51 probably would not have been accepted by Canadians. Omnibus Bill C-4, about this thick, I think if we had a referendum, probably would have went down. I can only guess. The bottom line is those that talk about referendums today usually are those that never held them when they were in power. So I find it somewhat hypocritical. Now, I guess the question becomes, and here's how Canadians are looking at it, and if you ask, it depends on the question and how you ask the question. If you ask a Canadian, excuse me, let me finish. If you ask a Canadian, is 36%.
Yes. Typically, it give the member the discretion to kind of manage the flow of the exchange, if that's all right. But I think we got your point.
Sounds like a referendum question.
No, but we got your point, though, on the,
Merci.
on the issue. Go ahead.
Je vais vous reposer ma question.
I'd like to reformulate my question. I hope that you can answer this question. The question I'm asking is that there were surveys conducted, polls carried out, and most recent polls asking citizens whether they were in favor of a referendum. The answer has been clearly in favor, over 50%. When we're talking about the population as a whole, then my question then is: do you recognize that these are valid surveys or polls?
Well, I recognize that there are valid surveys and polls, too, that say people want electoral reform. They want to get rid of the first past the post. So which poll do you want to use for your benefit, I guess, is a part of the discussion.
Parfait. Merci.
Enfin, on termine avec...
We'll be concluding then with Mr. Elbang.
Thank you. I'm going to start my questions with the witnesses from the Canadian Armed Forces. Looking through your brief, there was a line that caught my eye that talks about the deadline for returning special ballots to Ottawa for counting must be taken into account. So do I read that you actually transfer the physical ballots to Ottawa for distribution, either if people vote at their home location or home base, as opposed to counting in whatever location? I'm imagining on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic or Pacific, or at a base in Germany or elsewhere. So how does that actually work? Like, are you actually having to allow that physical transfer of ballots, and then get them distributed? Or are they actually being counted and then phoned in?
No, it's they're mailed in and counted by Elections Canada.
Okay, so that seems to be when you're talking about issues of timeliness and allowing members to maintain their knowledge as things evolve during the writ period. That would be a real challenge, I would think.
The larger the potential of missing out on key debates or issues. Although there is a physical dimension to making sure that the ballots do get back to Elections Canada.
Can you give us an idea of what kind of time frame? What would be the furthest out that you would need for some of the more extreme situations that your members would find themselves in?
Do you have some examples, VR, of the last time?
Currently, it's up to 9 days before. It really depends where the members are deployed. In Canada, it's a little bit easier. It should be easier from the United States, but it really depends where the members are deployed.
Okay, that's really a dimension that I hadn't even considered. The second question I have is that with the changes, and I can't remember if it was in the brief, if you said it was under the Elections Act that gives this kind of flexibility to our military members, or if it's under the Armed Forces Act or somewhere else. But does any of that apply to family members, or what kind of issues do family members who are deployed perhaps internationally face in trying to cast a ballot?
They would fall under the same category as any Canadian citizen that is outside of the country, depending on their time.
So it doesn't extend.
They're not associated with the Division 2 Canada
interesting.
elections.
And then things like identification, are there ever any identification issues for address, or the rules that are in place right now? Does that allow the members to be able to cast the ballot where they want, or do you have any kind of identification issues that pose barriers?
Most of the time it works in terms of members casting their vote where they wish to. As I had mentioned earlier, that if you change your statement of ordinary residence after the drop of a writ, it's not effective. So in that case, there is a difficulty in maybe voting in the riding with which you feel the connection of where you're serving. But members are asked on joining the regular force to put down their statement of ordinary residence, their usual place of residence before enrollment. So that should be the accurate address.
Okay, thank you. That's very enlightening information. There was aspects of the challenges that our members who serve that I hadn't considered, so I appreciate that insight. For the representatives from CARP, I just wanted to get your thoughts. I don't know, I think you said it, or at least I wrote it down, that when you talked to your members that they had spoken about online and telephone voting. Did that actually come up? Because I don't think that we've actually talked about telephone voting. It's been about online, but did I hear that correctly?
You did. So in some of the qualitative feedback sections of our survey, telephone voting and online voting were both raised. It's especially important, I think, for our members who have mobility issues. So those were raised as potential.
And I imagine that would be like a phone tree kind of system. Some sort of secure access and enter a PIN, and then for the Liberal candidate push 1, Conservative candidate push 2. Like, is that what you're talking about, or what?
Rotary dial.
She says, what about rotary or flip phone? But I'm sure that your members are more advanced than that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have information beyond kind of
that
them saying telephone and online, so it's something that we're not able to comment on, unfortunately.
Okay. Mr. Fitch, I had a question for you. In your opening comments, I'd heard you say that you really are a supporter of a referendum for major changes. And, so it's always that line, right, about what's major, what's minor. We've heard from some witnesses that, it might be too much to be going to a wholesale change. And so it's, the idea of incrementalism. And so, I'm sitting and thinking, well, what if for 2019 we introduced an element of proportionality? We've heard from many Canadians that they want to see some sort of PR system. And so what if we came up with a number of, X number of seats? It could be 10, it could be 30, to introduce Canadians to what this might look like and gain the support and the comfort with it. From your opinion, would that kind of incremental change require a referendum?
Well, it does cause a bit of a problem in that now you're not electing everyone on an equal footing. You're going to now elect a certain portion of the MPs one way, and then the others. So if you're staying with first past the post for 80% of the MPs, but then we're going to have this particular, if I understand you correctly, region or geographic region in the province or in the federation to do it another way.
I don't know what it would exactly look like, but yeah, it could be at a provincial level that. Just to say that we've heard that often there are disproportionate results. We heard when we were in the Atlantic provinces that although we like to think that everybody there are Liberals, as we saw in the results of the vote, that there's probably a couple of other party supporters, and so how would we actually allocate some sort of proportionality in that kind of situation to deal with the some of the skewed results that we do get from our current first past the post system?
Yeah, no, and I could comment on the division of votes, and maybe you could have a convert here. That means we'd have probably 4 seats now in New Brunswick on a federal level. But again, the people, spoke with authority to say we're not pleased with the present government, and we want the seats to go a certain way, and they want it fair and square with a first past the post. And I wouldn't come off my position that if you delineate away from the first past the post, you should get the authority from the people through a referendum.
Well, thank you, and that concludes our last meeting with witnesses. And
where's the champagne, Chair?
Well, we haven't really, we've been in a listening mode, and now we have some heavy lifting ahead. But that will be informed and inspired by the testimony we've heard this evening and over the course of the last few weeks. So I thank the witnesses for coming here in the evening to talk about electoral reform. I thank Professor Lupia for piping in through the use of modern technology. It was very interesting. We heard interesting insights from everyone, and we hope that you'll read our report when it's published. Maybe even buy it for Christmas for somebody. Anyway, thank you very much. Just to the members, I would just mention that tomorrow we were scheduled to meet we have an open mic session here on the Hill tomorrow, and it was supposed to start at 6:30, but because of votes, it will be delayed till about, I guess, 7 if we're lucky. There won't be no food will be served, so you might want to grab something before the votes upstairs, maybe, or whatever your normal pattern is. So I guess that's about all I have to say in regards to that, and we'll see everybody tomorrow night for some citizen input. Thank you.